The Lost Soul, a Confederate Soldier in New England, Part 2, Three Generations. In 1991, on a frozen Sunday afternoon, I began to contemplate where I might vacation if someone were kind enough to someday return. As a child, I had come to the age of awareness at the time of the murder of a young president, and as America commemorated the centennial of a brutal civil war. Now at 37 years of age, it occurred to me that although I had explored Europe and the west coast of the United States extensively, I had never ventured south of Washington, D.C. My intention was to tour several battlefields of the American Civil War. Limited to 2 weeks, I decided to visit a local library to research the sites. I wanted to see and plan the most efficient travel route. This casual visit to the library was the inadvertent first step in unraveling a complex and compelling story. One book in the library's Civil War collection suited my needs perfectly. It was a detailed state-by-state guide to the Civil War published in the early 1960s. I began by glancing through the Rhode Island section of the book and was struck by a particular reference that seemed completely out of place. Greenwood Cemetery has the grave of a Confederate soldier, Samuel Postlethwaite. At present, the grave site has an unmarked stone to the right of the William Rogers Greene stone. A Confederate? Was he a Rhode Islander? Why was his grave marked in such an undignified manner? Out of simple curiosity, I decided to visit the cemetery and see the humble grave for myself. The cemetery was much larger than I had expected, and finding the stone of William Rogers Greene seemed hopeless in the gathering darkness. The only other visitors turned out to be the cemetery owner and his wife, who took a moment with me to point out the graves of several Union soldiers. The gentleman had no knowledge of a Confederate soldier buried there. His wife agreed to check their records for me, but she was unable to find any documents dated earlier than 1920. I didn't know that I was embarking on a research project that would consume several years and require at least a dozen trips to the South. A story would slowly emerge, and I would speak with and explore sources throughout the United States. I had walked the battlefields on which a soldier and I had fought, and the fields he had plowed. Gradually, Sam, as I began to call him, come to life for me, a fascinating figure who, by accident of fate, became part of one of Rhode Island's most famous families, and whose story became entwined with mine. In Rhode Island, the first 3 weeks of August 1876 were very hot and dry. The drought was so severe that many mills were forced to shut down by low water levels. The weather was a preoccupation, and Rhode Islanders were still abuzz over the demise of General George Custer and his men somewhere in the West. But Sunday, 20 August, was a day for recreation and enjoying the company of friends and family. The day was cool and breezy, much more like October than midsummer. There were picnics and baseball games and several family outings at Bayside Park, known as Rocky Point. Many Rhode Islanders were enjoying Narragansett Bay, digging clams, or setting out to vacation at Block Island, a new resort spot. At 4:30 that afternoon, on the estate of his half-sister Mary, and husband William Rogers Greene, Samuel Postlethwaite died. The official cause of death was consumption, which Samuel had developed after being wounded in the lungs during the Civil War. He was 43 years old. The next day, Samuel's body was taken from Mr. Greene's estate, Quarterman Farm, and buried in Greenwood Cemetery, across the street. A small stone with the inscription SP marked the grave. Father Cockcroft of St. Andrew's Episcopal Church performed the funeral service. In one sense, the saga of the only Confederate soldier known to be buried in Rhode Island had begun. As late as 1876, many Rhode Island men were still suffering and dying from the wounds they had received a decade and earlier. What makes Sam's story unique is that he had been a Confederate soldier. Like most Southern soldiers, Sam had fought in what he believed was the Second War of Independence. It would become known as the Lost Cause. and like most Southern soldiers, Sam had been drawn into the conflict simply to defend his state. Although this is his story, it is also the story of two families whose sons fought on opposing sides through our greatest national tragedy. Three generations, the Greenes and the Postlethwaites. In the early 1700s, the Greene family was already a force in Rhode Island, business and politics. It would play a prominent role in the coming war for independence. The Greenes had produced two of the colony's governors and one of the state's founding fathers. Many of the Postlethwaite clan had emigrated from England in short order, attaining significant stature in Virginia and Pennsylvania. During the Revolutionary War, men of the Postlethwaite family served in the Carlisle, Pennsylvania militia. Captain John Postlethwaite was married to the daughter of Charles Scott, one of George Washington's generals. Several of the Greenes saw military service during the Revolution. Few soldiers experienced such a remarkable ascent in rank as Nathaniel Greene. In civilian life, Nathaniel Greene had managed his father's successful iron foundry. He walked with a noticeable limp, but his physical limitations did not prevent him from joining the Rhode Island State Militia. His natural gifts for military strategy were soon appreciated, and in a single promotion, he was transformed from a private to commander of the state militia. At the outset of the American Revolution, Greene was made responsible for the defense of Long Island. Later he would command the Continental Army in the Carolinas, which to this day he is regarded as highly as he is in his native state. His coolness and ability to make and justify unpopular decisions won George Washington's respect and trust. On several occasions he persuaded Washington not to attack the British or suggested retreat to the dismay of Washington's battle-seasoned generals. History has shown that these engagements would have been disastrous for the Continental Army and could have led to a total defeat. Nathaniel Greene was rumored to have been Washington's successor in the event of the unthinkable. He retired at the rank of general, remembered best for his long marches and his ability to divide his army and confuse the enemy. Nathaniel died at the age of 44 in 1786 of sunstroke, cheating the war hero of a promising political career. He twice declined the position of Secretary of War. One can only conjecture as to what his political aspirations may have been. At the end of the 18th century, Nathaniel Greene's widow joined struggling Virginia plantation owners in commissioning an inventor to produce a device that would make the harvesting of cotton more efficient. It took Eli Whitney only a matter of weeks to develop a machine that enabled one slave to do the work of several by separating the lint from the seed mechanically. Cotton production increased dramatically, as did the slave population. The cotton plantation's dependence on slavery was cemented by the advent of the cotton gin. At the beginning of the 19th century, the territory that would eventually become Mississippi was under the control of Spain. The governor of what was known as the Natchez District was Gayoso de Lemoyne. The town of Natchez sits high above the Mississippi River, and its massive bluffs hover above its ports, which is simply known as Under the Hill. The river provided for limitless commerce between the Louisiana territories and the United States. The area was rich in raw materials, such as cotton. Natchez was very attractive to entrepreneurs in the North, who began to settle in the area in hopes of building fortunes. One of the earliest settlers was Sam's grandfather, Samuel Postlethwaite, who descended the Ohio and Mississippi rivers from Pittsburgh on a flatboat. Upon arriving in Natchez, he sold the flatboat and began a career as a merchant. He became so successful that by his early 30s he was advising other settlers on financial matters, and some believe developing a close relationship with Gayoso.